So I think what we should do is, this is the session that's really dealing with some of the most critical problems. I mean, one of the things we know from the COVID period is that it's clear that people from lower income communities have been disproportionately affected, and that inequalities have been worsened over this period. We've fallen behind on achieving the SDGs, and in general, social safety networks are weaker. This is at one level an economic issue, another level of it's really a moral issue. It's a great challenge to see how to proceed. It was interesting yesterday hearing a number that there are probably 25% of the Indian population left in poverty, but it used to be double that. So it's significant. We've seen the same thing in China, and if you think about it, lifting 25% of these huge populations out of poverty is a tremendous achievement. But the idea is to leave no one behind, and we're not managing to do that as well as we should. So I thought what we would do is just start and give people on the panel an opportunity to make an opening kind of statement for 3 to 5 minutes, something like that, some of your major points, and then we can come back and talk with each other and with the audience about ideas we have for making progress, what the G20 can recommend. And also, I think one of the really interesting questions is coming from this part of the world, from Indonesia last year, from India this year, Brazil next year. These are areas that have been dealing with some of these social safety net problems for extended periods, and what are some of the best things we can do. But let me just start. I don't have a lot of information in terms of introducing people, so I will just, and I don't, let's see. Vijaya Lakshmi. I was going to say I could handle Lakshmi, but it was the other part that was throwing me. But Aurora. So she's the head of the program for Catholic Relief Services in China. So why don't we start with you, and then we'll just, and I can, after you speak, I'll just have this lengthy introduction, for each of you that's sort of the same.
Thank you, Professor Cole. I hope everybody can hear me. Thank you so much for giving me this opportunity. My respected fellow panelists and also friends and colleagues from the Interfaith fraternity. I want to make actually 3 points basically in my opening remarks. And I think Professor just spoke about how, because of the pandemic and the ongoing different kinds of crises, the vulnerable populations are affected disproportionately. And in the plenary session in the morning, we heard about the 3 C's or the 4 C's, and the multiple crises or the permanent nature of the crises which the world is currently facing. And given this, I think there is an urgent need to kind of look at how we can strengthen the social protection system or the safety nets for some of the poorest communities around the world. So I'm really happy to share my perspective, basically representing a faith-based organization. And I feel that faith-based organizations play a very pivotal role, in the humanitarian response system. And we do bring in unique perspectives to the creation of social and economic policies. So the one call for action that I have is something which came up yesterday as well. Like how can we ensure that, faith organizations are like present in the decision-making platforms, are, we are sitting at the table, as somebody mentioned earlier today. Um, and the reason why I'm calling for this, this recommendation is because of the three reasons that I want to speak about. The first one is about the mission of faith-based organization. Faith-based groups are driven by the belief that they have a moral imperative to improve the lives of people. And our mission is often, based on social values, and we use a more holistic approach to social protection. And this is because, we recognize the connection between the financial, physical, social, and the spiritual aspect of people's lives, and we strive to address their needs holistically. So, having stated this, social protection is not an initiative for us. It's actually very much a part of our DNA. The second point that I want to make is about the reach of the faith-based organizations. Yesterday, someone was mentioning that if you go to a really remote area, you will actually find a sister doctor running a single-person clinic, offering medical facilities to the most vulnerable or the last mile, population. So we are present in difficult locations, remote locations, and our presence is not based on grants. It's actually very long-term. And given this, this offers us an opportunity to really understand the communities better and have a deeper connection with the communities. And this helps us to bring in their perspectives, to inform any of the policies or programs that we are making. And the other thing that I want to reiterate is faith-based organizations are often the first responders in a humanitarian crisis. And because we are embedded in the communities, we are sometimes the only responders who are able to reach the most vulnerable. And the third point that I want to make as part of my opening remark is about the trust we bring, which is like the edifice of the work that faith-based organizations actually do. We often enjoy the trust of the community and can therefore serve. And because of their long-standing presence in the community, we are often best placed to promote social cohesion amongst migrants, refugees, host populations, act as a bridge between the government and civil society. And this trust, as I mentioned, is result of the deep and long-standing relationship that we have with the communities. So let me stop with this, and maybe I'm happy to come in after for more questions, responding to questions.
Yeah, well, thank you very much. I mean, I think that's very pithy and right to the point on some of the reasons the religious communities are so important, that they really are at the last mile, a mile that others often don't reach. And I think that's really an important thing to bear in mind. So next we have Reverend Fred Nibera, the director of Arigato International. Presumably you have some real expertise on children's issues as well. But so let me turn time over to you.
Yeah, thank you very much, Cole. And I would like to use my 5 minutes in sharing maybe just 5 principles that we need to have in mind when you think about the reforms in social protection and humanitarian reforms, and then try and look at that from the lenses of also the faith actors and faith-inspired organizations. My first point is that we need to promote social protection and human reforms that are guided by the principles of human dignity and social justice. Both in crafting of some of these processes and the programs and the coming up with the policies that really protect the dignity of those that are in need. And these are principles of human dignity and social justice are actually found in so many of faith communities. The language might be different, it might not be the human rights language, but they are there, and therefore that's one area whereby the developmental world and agencies can have a nexus with faith communities. But the right language is important, the right expression is important. So how do we make the beneficiaries realize that their dignity is not infringed while these reforms are taking place and the services are taking place? But let me also just flip that and say that it's also a human rights. They're human rights. And it's not when there are inequalities and the injustices that lead to the need for social protection and humanitarian needs, is not their making, but it's their rights, and we should also look at it from that perspective. My second point is that we need to prioritize the needs of the most vulnerable populations in our social protection and humanitarian programs. And this means ensuring that resources are targeted to those who need them the most, and that programs are designed in a way that does not create a culture of dependency, but instead empowers individuals to achieve self-sufficiency. Because self-protection and even humanitarian assistance can sometimes lead to dependency. And I don't think that's what we want. Maybe initially it might be very necessary, but in the long term, as we think about reforms, it means that it should be something that leads to resilience of the communities affected. My third reflection is that we need to improve the coordination and effectiveness of humanitarian assistance. We've seen it in many places, and Kenya for a very long time had the biggest refugee center in the world. I think that has changed now. And you see there are so many duplications and so much wastage and so much competition, whether it's within the faith communities or the governments or the multilaterals or international organization. And I believe that this can be achieved through better communication and collaboration between aid organizations and governments and also the faith communities, as well as greater transparency and accountability in the delivery of aid. Because accountability is also needed, whether it's the faith organizations or not, whether it's the governments. There's a lot of corruption that we talked about this morning within the provision of social protection and even the humanitarian aid. And then fourthly, we need to recognize the importance of faith-based organizations, and that has been said in providing social protection and humanitarian assistance. And you've articulated it very well, Lakshmi.
That's okay.
But as we do this, I don't want to go back to the same points that you've raised. It's also important to have self-critique of ourselves as faith organizations. It's important to ensure that our work does not undermine secular approaches to the social protection and humanitarian assistance, but it's also important to ensure that we involve others, and the involvement of the faith actors is not based on religious or political agendas, but rather the needs of the communities that they serve. Because it's very easy to use that as a conversion field or focus more on the individual's aspects of the faith. And that's where interfaith collaboration and cooperation and engagement can be very helpful in a situation like that. And finally, humanitarian assistance can sometimes be short-term solutions to long-term problems. I believe that while emergency aid is necessary in time of crisis, it is important also to address the root causes of poverty and inequality to create sustainable solutions. We need to address the root causes of poverty and inequalities such as discrimination, conflicts, economic injustices. And this requires long-term and comprehensive approach that goes beyond the provision of social protection and humanitarian assistance. Both must go hand in hand. What we are saying here is, if you have refugees, why do we have refugees? We should not always focus at the end of what do we do with these refugees? What do we do with these people who are displacements? What do we do with these economic immigrants? But we should also think about it in a very holistic way if we are thinking about reforms in this situation. Thank you.
Well, thank you very much. I mean, I think that's very helpful to see sort of 5 areas laid out, and I think we would all agree. I think we can come back and sort of ask more about how we do some of those, apply some of those principles. But I think that's a great starting point. So next we will be hearing from Abdul Halim Mahfooz, the founding chairman of the Waqf Foundation of Teburung, which I've probably mispronounced, Pesantren. But what, for those of you who know Indonesia, he is the nephew of Gus Dur, if I got that right,
Yes.
which is, for those of us who have tremendous respect for that person and family, that speaks a great deal. And I understand that this is one of the most famous pesantren in the Indonesian archipelago, islands.
Yes.
So let me turn the time to you.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Cole. Thanks, Reverend. First of all, I would like to thank Cole and the team and the organizer for inviting me to this great event, where I get the opportunity to share with you and to listen from you all, the expert in helping people. Where I feel that in the last 2 days, I was among the good people here with good intention, and I had a very nice, a very good programs, good proposals, how to help people. Locally in Indonesia, as Cole mentioned, I come from a pesantren, it's an Islamic boarding school that was set up 123 years ago, and now has 6,000 students. That's only in Jombang, which is 700 kilometers away from Jakarta. The pesantren now has 19 branch schools across Indonesia, totally about 20,000 students. And we try to ask these students to understand the situation. And the good thing is that most of the pesantren or students at pesantren or boarding schools, they are mostly come from the lower income families. So we really understand how they feel, how they perceive the situation, how they try to struggle and be a better people. They study hard, they work hard, and easy to tell this is what you need to do, because they understand that if they don't do that, they will not be somebody. This is a good thing. And other good thing in Indonesia is also the fact that Indonesian government allocate 20% of the state budget for education. That is amount of 46.5 billion US dollar a year. And next year will be the biggest state budget allocated for education. And thank you very much for the government. But that doesn't mean that all of the education aspects will be taken over or will be completed by that big budget. Because Indonesia is a big country that spread from east to west, just like the US. Yeah, and there are 300 tribes and people with different languages, dialect in Indonesia. So it's still, challenges are still there. We need a certain and very specific approach, how to give a good education and to give access for students in the remote areas for better education. So we would like to introduce through my my organization, we set up in only last year, not even a year yet. It was set up June last year. We haven't had any anniversary yet. But we come to the idea that seeing the situation in Indonesia, the very many tribes and dialects in Indonesia, and also the fact that there are the spread of the country, but we have a very nice principle that everybody obey in Indonesia, that is the Pancasila, the 5 principles that requires all of the citizens to pray only one God. That's very fundamental things we use as approach to communicate socially. And it's also the fact that we have some traditional gatherings, traditional approach that gave people opportunity to share, even though most of them are really living at the middle or maybe lower class level people, but they are traditionally they are engaged, and socially they engage in terms of giving, what we call with selamatan, praying to God for goodness. So we would like to apply the approach that in Indonesia, to help other people gain access to good education, we would like to introduce what we call rahmatan lil alamin, blessing for all creations, where everybody got the same opportunity to access education. And one way of the best option for that is going through the pesantren, Islamic boarding schools. Why? Because Islamic boarding schools is a school that anybody can set up, of course with the some with legal permit, but maybe 2 or 3 times of the existing pesantren, they don't have any permit. Why? Because they don't have time to deal with the too long bureaucratic things, or maybe they don't really care about the regulation, but they really want to educate young people. That's the problem. So there may be a boarding school that consists only 10 or 15 young people that goes to other school, but they live in a compound, in a house managed by the leader, which is called kiai usually, and learn together. Mostly they study about Islam, about religion. That's one good thing. But other thing, just like my pesantren, is a big one. There are pesantren with 30 and 40,000 students in one city, and they don't have a decent dorms. They don't have a decent. Some of the students, they just sleep on the stairways because they don't have beds. So the important things here is we have a moral obligation and we have a moral communication with them that we'd like to let them study. That's why we called our program next is a blessing for all creations. Rahmatan lil alamin. Yeah. And a good thing is also the fact that CAF put the category of the countries in the world. And Indonesia, in 5 years in a row, top 1 of the most generous country in the world. In 5 years. This year, 2022, Indonesia ranked top because 68% of the people gave their money to help other people. Even though they don't know who the people are, they give money, to share with other organizations to help people. 15 to 20% of the money they give is given to somebody they don't know. But the idea is to help other people. So Indonesia has been categorized as the most generous country in the world. Now, still, even though with 42 billion US dollar and also the generosity of Indonesians, that doesn't mean that all of the education situation has been finished or solved. There are still many issues and need to be, the most important one is the coordination, because most of the schools, they are privately owned. And there is no obligation for the schools to have the coordination or to have under the ministry. Ministry of Religious Affairs control the schools actually, but then 2/3 of the schools, they don't really follow the curriculum or maybe the programs for the ministry, for the government, because they have their own approach. So coordination is one thing. And also, there are other elements in the public that has not been involved in terms of improving education. In particular, are the business people and mass media. I need to mention this because my organization would like to organize and have done organizing communication and invitation to the business community and mass media to help with communicating the idea of good education. So we invite, in Indonesia, we invite business people, particularly mostly of them are Chinese. As you know, you understand that Indonesia business sectors are mostly controlled by the Chinese descent. So we invite these Chinese people. They're not Muslim, but we talk to them. This is the situation, and they're very happy to join our programs to help people in helping education. That's one. Number two, media. Why we need media? Because we are facing situation that social media has been go so wild. So we need to communicate to public decent way how to tell them that we need to go further in terms of giving education to public. So we organize meeting with the business community, and we organize meeting with mass media regularly. We inform them what is the progress of the education. We also inform them what are needed to help our people well educated. So we call it the strategy as a pentahelix. This is the growth of a triple helix that has been accommodated by the OECD in the first. Now it grows to five helix, pentahelix, with 5 pillars. Pentahelix, 5 pillars. Here, number one is a government in close cooperation with the civil society, and then with the business community, and then with academia, and then last thing with the mass media. These 5 pillars work closely to identify what we can do to improve the education. And we find out that the more messages we can send to the different groups of society, just like the business people, they're more aware, and also they act more eagerly how to help. Because if they don't know anything about the program education, they'll just stay away, and they have a different perspective. So we'd like to invite these 5 elements in the community government with civil society, mass media, business community, and academia. And we'd like to continue the cooperation. I hope that we can, this can be useful for the programs in Indonesia. Thank you.
Well, thank you, and that adds a particular education focus on some of the social safety nets, and that's particularly an area that is really important and also being discussed in some of the other sessions. So that's very important. So next we'll be hearing from, and I think I can do 2 of 3. Dr. Siti Rudhaini Juhayatin.
Yes. Very
So
difficult name.
it's a difficult name, but she is the senior advisor in the executive office of the President of Indonesia, and we're very honored to have her here with us and to get her perspective. And we've given her double duty because she also got to speak yesterday, I think. So thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Professor Coates, and also respected panelists. Of course, this is thank you again for the second session, and I love to do this. And in this session, I would like to share my rather unique position that helped me to reorient my visions of my activism. I am actually the professor at the state university, means that I'm the government's official. But my one leg is actually I'm also NGO activist in the area of human rights and women's rights. And also I took the position offered by the president as the special advisor, special staff to him, and now is the senior advisor to the office. And it's really blends it blends the orientations of my life, as this morning mentioned that we have to sit in the room. So this conclusion in the morning sessions really give me the idea that being in the room is very important. So my presentation will be how I myself look at the social protection and humanitarian reform, and also how the state, the position of the states in empowering social protections, and also how to encourage the faith-based leaders and organizations to work together with the governments to empower society, including social protections. So what I mean by the social protection is actually how to encourage and to empower society to become socially resilient. So social resilience is actually the term that we should use to see the capacity of the society, as also mentioned by reference Nyabera. Yeah. So the social resilience is very important because governments or the state will not be able to provide all the needs of the people, because of one is of course the resources, but the second is the structure and also the bureaucracy, which is, as mentioned by Pak Kiai Mahfud, sometimes it takes times to reach to the people. So that is actually the importance of the building and empowering social resilience to empower society itself. And it's involved at least three aspects. One is actually mutual trust. So the mutual trust has to be there in order to help the society to be inclusive, and also encourage them to have more interactions within different groups of society, and also it's being flexible, and when it's comes to the respect of diversity, then the society will celebrate these differences. So that is actually the mutual trust that should be there in our society. And the second is we have to also encourage the courage, the optimism of the society, because through the mutual trust, then optimism will be there, and it will lead to creativity in embracing changes. And the third is the cohesion, social cohesion. So when the society, they have trust, they have courage, then social cohesion is quite easy. Is quite easily established. So one is a willingness to cooperate constructively, and also cohesion also will support dignified individual, and this dignified individual, again, it will be the basis for strengthening the mutual respect, and also responsibility, individual responsibility for the existence of the society. So that is actually the basic of the social resilience, which we have a very strong basis and guidance to create such kind of social resilience, be from the international or universal principles, such as Declaration of Human Rights, the covenants, the resolution. We have so many resolutions that we can refer to, and then also, of course, the national values and principle, and local wisdom as well. So that is actually all the things that that actually are viable to us to strengthen the social resilience. Now, this social resilience has to be supported by the state or the governments. But the problem is how the state will support the society to be resilient. Because there is a tendency that the state tends to control the society rather than facilitating them to become more resilient. And this tendency has to be changed. It should be shifted from the control from the central governments, or centralized control from the governments, into decentralization. Mm-hmm. So people has to be given power and given choices to determine what is actually needed by the society, rather than everything dictated by the state. And the second is also the tendency to subordinate society by the state, because of course the state, the governments, they have political power, they also control the resources, the national resources. And the third, that the state has to be a good facilitator and mediator for the social conflict. And we witnessed that recently many countries tend to deal the social tension and social conflict in much more formal and legal approaches. So that is actually also, it will also adding to more divisions in our society. So that is actually the proposal that I provided in the office of the president, that the state has to be the duty bearer of rights of the people. Means that the state has to be a facilitator and mediator rather than the controller of society. And in many occasions, and I have the conversation directly with the president or with other colleagues in the office, that to be able to encourage the state with all the ministers. So we have to shift the understanding or the perceptions of the state or of being the providing the services. So it's giving the services into, as I said, the duty bearer of rights. It means that the state itself has to shift the understanding of providing services into respecting and fulfilling the basic rights of the people. And in 2020, in their official remarks by the president of Indonesia in the parliament, the president himself declared the shift of approach of the state from being the service provider into human rights protector and also human rights fulfiller. So that is actually the importance of us as the of social activists and also as academia to sit in the room and to mainstream our visions to the state policies, particularly in relation to social protection and other aspects of the policies. And being in the government circle, it is not preventing me to also continue engaging with civil society organization. One of this organization is Laimena. Here, Matthias is also with us. That this is actually the way that I myself bridge myself from the state in one side and the society in the other sides, so that this balance is very important to enrich their understandings of both society and the governments in achieving the national and also, of course, the international and also the religious the religious objectives in putting everyone in dignity and respect. So that is actually the things that I would like to relate between my activism and my roles in the government, and also how to engage the religious leaders and religious institutions. So I think I have to stop here.
Okay, thank you. So thank you again very much, because I mean this, I have the sense it brought from the earlier session to sort of focus on how things fit together and blend, and how you have to connect various parts of what we're talking about, and then really the tension between building self-reliance and avoiding dependency in this social network area. This is one of the really deep dilemmas in a way. So I'm sure we'll be able to talk more about that. But first we'll hear from Hesha Pereira, and she is the manager of the End Child Poverty Knowledge Center, and we'll let you talk more about how you're coming at these issues.
Thank you, Professor Call. Good afternoon, everyone. It's such a privilege and honor to be here within these experts and professionals. I'm Hesha Pereira and from Sri Lanka. So, okay. Can you hear me now?
Yeah.
Okay, thank you. It's like I wish to talk about some points from the ground level that we have, as I'm working with faith-based and faith-inspired organizations. So the social protection is a set of policies and programs that are designed to reduce and prevent poverty and vulnerability in all people's lives. So as a person who is working with SDGs, in SDGs number 10, reduce inequalities. So it's like aim to promoting greater equality among all people that we are living in our countries. With the impact of COVID-19 made a huge social and economic crisis among Sri Lanka and also in South Asian countries, also especially impact for the low income communities. This is a huge crisis. As I mentioned earlier, within the South Asian communities in last 2-3 years. Governments, UN agencies, also the international organizations are facing growing humanitarian challenges every single day. In Sri Lanka, with the COVID pandemic and also with the political turmoil, also with the economic crisis, we are suffering with social assistance and looking much more needed, assistance from maybe sometimes maybe with grants and also with in kind. So there's a huge need with religious leaders and also other faith-based organizations that people are looking for this support. Sometimes maybe it's not only the financial support, the psychosocial support that they are looking for, especially for the vulnerable and marginalized communities. Sometimes there are so many households with no means of adequate support, also single people, women-headed families, and also children that we are working with, facing so many difficulties in physically and also mentally challenged. So there's a huge need of humanitarian reforms as well as policies. Also active efforts and religious actors should be in the central point of this discussion to more inclusive and integrated all this together. Also, sometimes you might know Sri Lanka was facing 30 years of war, and there were so many tragic incidents happen. And for the psychosocial support, where the religious leaders came and take the front line, and support was specially for the communities and also for children, women-headed families, and also for the youngers. So I feel like the community mobilization as well as support for the youth and volunteers and also advocate them is one of the things that they can do as religious when we are looking for the religious perspective for the social reforms and also humanitarian actions. Yep, thank you.
So thank you. So again, thank you very much. And now what I'd like to do is just open open discussion to, and maybe we start with this. Well, I think we're all agreed that we should try to find ways of being at the table. I don't know if this was said this morning. I learned this from Catherine Marshall. If you're not at the table, you're on the menu. So it's valuable to find ways to do that. But I think one of the critical issues, and it's surfaced in a number of the talks, is how one achieves resilience or self-reliance that's really stable and while avoiding dependency, because one of the great challenges in providing aid is that the people may become dependent on the aid, and that interferes with their ability to be self-supporting, self-reliant, and resilient. So, are there ways that as in your particular fields that you've seen that balance struck in positive ways, that we could have some good models or ideas that could be recommended? I don't know if we may just go down the line again and just see what you think about that.
Yeah. Thank you. Thank you, Professor Cole, for posing, I think, a very pertinent question. I think it depends on what kind of approach you are going to follow when you are engaging with communities who are, going through or experiencing a humanitarian crisis. And like I mentioned earlier, from CRS's own experience, especially if I take the context, let's say, of refugee population who kind of move from one country to another, then of course they need the safety net, they need the social protection. But we are also looking at, how can we support them with opportunities for livelihood? How can we support them for having the ability to speak the local language so that they can feel more integrated within the community? So I think the way to probably ensure a more sustainable way of working is to also not just only provide that interim support, but also to focus on what can you offer them to recover from that situation and lead, as you said, Reverend Fred, in terms of a dignified life. We definitely don't want them to become dependent. And that's why I think it's really important for donors to actually invest more in the recovery phase, so that we really enable the people who are impacted by crisis to come out of that situation and lead a more sustainable life.
Great. Fred.
Thank you very much, Cole. I think 4 things that belong to one unit come to mind. One is focus at the values and attitudes. So the education that you talk about should also focus on that, so that they don't find themselves engaging in poverty of mind and heart, now from the faith perspective. But how do we bring that dignity of work? But that's not enough to change their way of thinking, but also treat them with that dignity, so that they don't feel that they depend on you. This power play is demystified, and it's more like you just find yourself in this situation. And there are a number of churches that are dealing with that, from my perspective, that are dealing with that social aspect. The second one to me is knowledge, which I think has been shared here in education. And then the skills that are relevant to where they are, so that they build themselves to something more productive, which is action, number 4. But I go back to what Adams talked about yesterday, localization, even in social provision and humanitarian reforms, where they are also involved in the decision making. It's not just we are bringing this and that's really it, but they are involved in the whole process. Thank you.
Thank you. Very helpful.
Yeah, thanks. We focus on education because we want one thing that we can do not alone. We see that currently in this new era where social media has been so widely read and used as information, we need to work with a lot of stakeholders. That's why we propose that we have a cooperation with the government, yes, with the civil society, yes, with the business community. We do not want this business community is left behind, as the topic that we discussed a day before. And then we also work with the media, because media really will help us to communicate with public. And also public here, it's also with the donors, with also people or maybe just humble people that really want good access to education. So we really have pentahelix. We really promote that, and we use that as our tool to communicate. And we want that. We really hope that the pentahelix will work to communicate our messages to a wider community. Thank you.
I think the questions related also to the existence of society itself as the basis for the nations, because we have the nations and we have the state, the two things, and society belongs to the nation. So that is actually the discussions in our office, and also the reports to the presidents that strengthening social resilience is in fact strengthening the nations. So that's so the government has to shift the political paradigms of being the controller of the people into the facilitator of the people and society, because the government is politically is the mediator for nurturing and strengthening the nation. This is very important. And it is why in the recommendations and also my groups saying that don't take all the social resources by the state. For example, in Indonesia, people tend to give power to the state. For example, we have, as I said, I mentioned yesterday that we have social resources like zakah in Islam, sadaqah, and also such kind of all the almsgiving. And there is the tendency of many people that this kind of donation is managed by the government. And this proposal is also forwarded to our office, and I refused this as the opportunity for the society to manage their own resources. Because in the times of the pandemic, for example, all the centralized resources cannot really touch to the society in the ground. So we really need to maintain such kind of social modality, social resources still in the society. They have to manage that in their own community. Because as I mentioned earlier, nation state is consists of two things, nation and state. And the second and their
Could you say a little bit more about what you mean by that
the nation
distinction?
and the state.
Yeah.
Okay. So the nation is actually the intentions of many groups of community, communality. So I will reflect to Indonesia, for example. Being united Indonesia is consists of many ethno-religious communalities. We have 700 ethno-religious communalities in Indonesia. Before it was declared as the United Indonesia. And it is, and they are deeply rooted in the culture, in the local culture. So in 1928, in the time of a colonial period, the ethno-religious communality, they gathered and they declared to have one nation. But the state is not there, it was not there. Because we are under the colonial ruler at the time. So once this ethno-religious communality, they come together to declare the nations, then they fight for having the state.
But their state as opposed to the colonial state, is that?
And that time,
Yeah.
and then after that, in 1945, we have our own state.
But the state is still different than the nation at that point.
This is different, but this is interrelated.
Yeah.
Because the state is actually the basis for the nation is actually the basis for the state.
Yeah.
It is why it has to be go together. And because the nation is basically the nation is based on the civil supremacy to manage themselves, and the state is actually how to administrate it. The needs of the society, which is actually the representation of the state, sorry, the representation of the nations, so that the state is facilitating the needs of the nations to survive.
Okay.
That is actually there. It's just it's much more administrative, the state, but the nation is the substance of a country.
Okay.
Yeah. So that is also our strong recommendations for the states to shift the paradigms from service provider to stronger as the duty bearer of rights of the society. Means that the state and the society has to be in the equal position in managing the country. State and the nation is managing the country.
Okay. Okay.
Thank you, Professor Kaul. So when it comes to approaches, I think it will be a challenge and also a complex process. Because when we are working with the ground level people and their needs are a bit different, so engaging them for the decision making process at the field level, also like engaging them for the activities that we are conducting is one of the things that we can do. Also like building the trust, also collaboration between the different actors, civil societies and also the organizations that is there. Also the effective communication. Like when it comes to the work that we are doing in the ground level, I think faith leaders can be like they are working as agents, and also they can support for the people that they come up with their own decisions with their own languages. So it will support for the well-being of all the residents, also the people that we are serving in the ground level. So I just want to highlight these points when it comes to approaches, how faith communities are working in the ground level and support for the decision making of people. Yeah, thank you.
So, in the G20 context, let's see, Indonesia is a G20 country, India is a G20 country. I mean, one of the questions is, as we're thinking about these social safety network issues, we know that we have these, we have these issues in the United States. We've wrestled a lot with how you have welfare without inducing dependency, and whether you should have reform in this area, and sort of how to do it. But one of my questions is, from a G20 perspective, where should the priority be, or where is it likely to be? That is, to what extent should the G20 countries be focusing on these issues out beyond their own borders? Because if the problem is, the problems are more acute in the poorer areas, if the G20 focuses on its own issues, it's focusing really on the most well-to-do societies. So how do we sort of recommend, what should the G20 be doing out beyond its own borders, and how much? Politically, it's very hard if you're in the United States and you're representing a district that has some poor people. They say, we need things, so you've got to give us priority over elsewhere. But so how do we make recommendations to the G20 on where their focus should be? I don't know if anyone wants to take this in any particular order, but it's something I'm thinking about as we're trying to think about how to formulate recommendations.
Just one comment is, there's the issue of migration, which we're dealing with here.
Yeah.
And this is a global issue.
Yeah.
It doesn't really matter whether you are in Europe or wherever. And those countries that belong to G20 are already struggling with it.
Yeah.
They see the migrants coming to their countries. And there are a lot of social tensions. There's a lot of resource tensions that are there.
Yeah.
So I think it's to communicate to them to deal with the push factors from these so-called poor countries that might not affect them immediately, but it will have an implication. So whether there's civil conflicts that are there and somehow they have a bearing from a geopolitical level, we know that, or whether it is the economic hardships that are there because of the inequalities, global inequalities. So they must pay attention to that, otherwise it's going to affect them. And COVID told us that we are all connected.
Can I? I just want to, reiterate what Reverend Fred is saying. And I think what was said in the morning session in terms of, the interconnectedness of the world today. It's not like a problem is going to be contained by a border of a nation state. In fact, the implications of it we saw like during the pandemic. So I think it's really a wake-up call in that sense to not just think about, one's own country, but really look at, what is happening beyond the borders, to recognize, the implications that is there for the humanity as a whole. So I think, honestly, the interconnectedness is what I would like to reiterate.
Yeah.
Thank you. For Indonesian context, we'd like to promote actions that is inspired by Islam. That's what I mentioned with the Rahmatan lil Alamin, blessing for all creations. What is that? Based on the calculation of the National Waqf Foundation that is controlled by the government, they say that the potential of Waqf or endowment in Western concept, it is about $12 billion a year, which is a big amount of money that nobody has tried to tap it. So it goes wild and hasn't been tried to be organized in such a way, and that's why I would like to support Ibu Ruhaini's idea that we need to promote more role for all of the stakeholders. So government can do it by itself. Business community, as I mentioned, and then media, and also just regular people need to be promoted and have their own roles based on their own situation. We, my organization, will open as a kind of like savings for everybody, even though it's only $50 a month, but we need to record it and collect it daily, monthly, weekly, monthly, or maybe annually. And we try to understand that this is the opportunity for everybody to help. Back to the idea that Indonesia is the most generous country in the world. So we need, and we'd like to, it's lucky me that Ibu Ruhaini is here, to say to government, please give everybody opportunity to participate, to help people. Thank you.
Professor Ko, I think you rightly highlighted that the G20 is not for G20 in the opening, and this is actually in line also with the themes, at least for the two G20's presidencies. Indonesia, for example, the theme is recover together, recover stronger. Means that this is for the whole the whole world. And then the themes of India presidency is one earth, one family, and one future. So,
so and it's beyond.
Yes, this is beyond G20. But we have to also realize that G20 is I think the core is actually on economic development, of course, also human development as well. But faith-based leaders and faith-based organization has to be there to convey the moral call that the themes, the G20 themes, has to go beyond the economic cooperations, the industrial and sort of things that go into the growth, the economic growth and prosperity. It has to be go beyond and reach to what is called humanity. So our role here in this event is how we convey to G20 the moral call to them that the themes of the G20 has to go to all humanity, no one left behind of the members of G20. So the themes is always, to my understanding, is go beyond the membership of G20, and but the issue is we have to remind them, because they all are the governments, and the government is always put development, physical developments is there. But as their faith-based organization and faith-based leaders, we are adding to the themes and adding to the vision and the missions of G20 to reach humanity and humankind, and also the nature, of course. As earlier session mentioned, we don't have any home but this earth. Yeah. Yes, this is very strong. I think this is a very strong message to G20 that faith-based organization position is actually to convey this message, the moral message to humanity.
Yeah, one of the dilemmas in sort of thinking about this is the strength that we have as the G20 Interfaith Forum is bringing precisely those kind of religious perspectives to bear. And one temptation is to say, to reach back to our religious roots and say, we need religion teaches us to be good and kind and loving and so on, and then we have to say, okay, and so you, well, I had to imagine President Trump listening to these messages. I didn't know that that was going to get through, but imagine other leaders, and where do religious voices have a kind of unique qualification, as it were, to say something that will really make sense in the policy world, and will really be practically effective, and because it's practically effective, will be persuasive to G20 leaders within their own countries and beyond. I think I just made that question too complicated, but
I think, no, I was just saying that it's a very good question, because many times we meet as faith communities, we come up with brilliant ideas, and then we start asking ourselves, how does it go to the policy makers? One option is to have everybody in the house, where you have bilaterals, you have the policy makers, you have faith communities, so we don't talk about each other, but we talk to each other. The second one is the need to have bilingual ability to be able to speak about the faith principles, the moral imperative that you're talking about in a developmental language, and vice versa, which needs some mutual literacy. Faith actors need to have development literacy that inform the policy, but also help the policy makers and the governments to have faith literacy, so they also understand what we're doing, so that being bilingual without being schizophrenic.
yeah. Well, I know we've got some people who have been working very hard on religious literacy and diversity, but yeah, that's probably true. We've got to get Matthias there working on how to bridge the policy religion divide. And actually, I mean, I'd say that sort of jokingly, but I think that's really one of the main things that we've been wrestling with the G20 Interfaith, because what we recognize is there's a tremendous store of insight, wisdom, and experience coming from the religious communities, but it's translating that into sort of key policy domains is one of the challenges. Now, in a way, what we're talking about in this session ought to be the easiest case, right? Because concern for the vulnerable is what religious, I mean, that was what Catherine Marshall emphasized. She emphasized it in our meetings, but she hammers it on me all the time. But it's really true. So this is an area where, you know, you've had experience out working in the villages, or where the religious sensitivities can really make a difference. But how to then focus, and in some ways, if you think about our program here, I mean, the 4 C's. I mean, we weren't cheating. We've got a W in, and we got, you know, there's conflict. There are some other C's and so forth, but in a way, in this session, we're really talking about the core of how we translate this religious altruism into something that can really work. Yeah.
Let me just share my perspective from the experience of working here in India. I think I agree with Reverend Fred in terms of one is, I think, the need for both parties to sit and talk to each other with an open mind. Currently, I mean, the yes, yes, because maybe there is a narrative about the religious actors today which probably needs to be revisited. And not everything about faith actors are bad, right? I mean, I'm not saying everything is great. There has to be a call for self-reflection and accountability as faith actors. But at the same time, I think there needs to be an openness to listen to each other. And while, CRS, like if I take one example in India, we are currently working with the government in one of the states to address one of their priorities. We are working with the child protection system to actually strengthen, their capacities, the system's capacities to actually identify at-risk families and see how that can be, I mean, how those families can be really strengthened. And this is being done by us providing, working hand in hand with the government system. So it is possible, and I guess it's a question of how well maybe we are as faith actors able to speak their language or speak to their priorities. And as I mentioned in the opening remarks, I think one of the advantage that we have is our long presence in the communities, the embedded nature of our presence and the interconnectedness that we have, the deeper understanding of, the vulnerabilities. If we are able to then, translate those insights in a manner that, it speaks to the priority of the policy makers, then I think you can kind of come together. But yes, I think it will be really welcome if there is an openness on both sides to kind of listen to each other and talk to each other and maybe learn the language or, yeah.
I think one of the encouraging things is that there's more opportunities for this kind of partnership building. And we have Adam Phillips here from USAID, which is sort of a case in point in a mega government institution. And you're talking about this and thinking about this in the president's office. You're thinking about it in education, sort of mega educational settings, and you're seeing this from both sides. Now I'm suddenly looking at my clock and realizing that I kept thinking of questions to ask, so I owe you in the audience if there's some particular questions you'd like to add in. Realizing that we're already out of time, but that's my fault. Any pressing questions from the audience? Well, why don't you join with me in thanking our audience? I mean our audience. Yeah, audience, please thank our audience. And you can tell we really have basis for ongoing discussion. So, and this will continue. So thank you very much.